Welcome to this episode of Locked In. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you how to go tubeless on your bike for essentially 10 to 15 bucks. So if you want to see how to go tubeless on a budget, please stay tuned. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the tools you're going to need so you can do this yourself at home with potentially almost 70% of these items you may have lying around already, so that you can try out tubeless if you haven't already on a budget, especially with everything going on with the pandemic and everything else. Some of these parts are hard to get, so here's an alternative for you. Little disclaimer before I get into the video, this is going to be something you have to do at your own risk. I do not take any responsibility of how your experience goes, but I'm going to give you my experience personally, and I'm going to be talking about how it worked after and during and things like that during this video as well. But let's kick off into what you're going to need for this video. So first off, you're going to need some Gorilla Tape. This you may have lying around, and I say specifically Gorilla Tape just because from what I've heard and researched, this is actually very similar, if not identical, to what Envy, a very high-end wheel manufacturer, ships with their tubeless ready setup, obviously in their custom widths. I'm assuming from this manufacturer specifically, but do not use duct tape or masking tape. Get Gorilla Tape in whatever size roll that you want. You can see here how much I've actually used of it already. The roll width doesn't matter, but something around this size is kind of ideal so you can make multiple widths potentially on different rims. Then you're going to need a set of hopefully some old punctured tubes you have laying around with holes in them that you've been thinking of maybe doing a cool project with. Simply take those and you're going to want to cut those valves out to use as your tubeless valves. But if you have some tubeless valves laying around, feel free to use those as well. I'll talk about some pros and cons using that later in the video. Then you're going to want some calipers or measuring tape or something to measure the internal rim width of the rims you're going to be tubeless taping, as well as an X-Acto knife, razor blade, or box cutter. This is what you're going to use to actually cut the Gorilla Tape, and your sealant of choice. Now, I haven't made my own sealant before. If you really like this video, give it a thumbs up and comment below that you want me to try to make my own sealant. I've never tried doing that before, but hey, who knows? Maybe I'll like it. So now let's get into actually setting this up. Now, this is obviously going to take a little bit more time than just running a bead of tubeless tape on your rims, because you do need to cut it to width. But the benefit is the cost savings. This roll only cost me $4.95, again, if you don't already have it at home. But you're gonna be able to get roughly, I'd say in this size of a roll, at least 6 wheels done for $5. And for reference, if you don't already know, tubeless tape typically runs about $20 to $30 for a roll of it. That'll do at least 2 wheels. So you're getting a huge cost savings there. So what you're gonna do is take your calipers and measure the internal rim width of your rim, and then you wanna add about 1 millimeter to that. So for instance, these are 19 millimeter rims on this wheel internally, so I wanted to do about 20 millimeters when cutting the tape. What you're then gonna do is find a random assortment of books or magazines to slowly stack something up to get you close to the rim width that you want. I would say if you're a mil over, that's better than being a millimeter or 2 under. So find something appropriate and find something you have laying around home using your calipers or your measuring tape to get something the exact width that you need. Once that's done, you're simply going to lay the masking tape on a flat surface with your razor blade, box cutter, or X-Acto knife resting on top of your items, keeping in mind that that potentially might add thickness to it. That's why I like using a razor blade, because it sits right on top of the books that I chose. Then you're simply going to slowly start scoring the tape, holding consistent pressure on the back of the blade and slowly spinning the tape to cut into it. Keeping in mind that first light cut is basically going to be a guide for the next cuts. So you want to cut slow and deliberately, slowly spinning the masking tape as you go, as the blade gets deeper. Now, I know there's no real set rule of how many and how deep to go on this, so just kind of keep going until it gets really difficult where you feel the blade deforming or it's getting difficult to actually do. You can always go through and recut later if need be. Now it's time to actually apply it to your rim. Make sure your rim's nice and clean, wipe it out if it's dirty. These are brand new rims, so I didn't have to do that for this video. Then you're gonna actually apply the tape about 1/2 inch beyond where your valve stem hole is, and then you're gonna wanna pull the tape nice and tight and slowly wrap this around the rim. And as you can see here, I actually didn't do this perfectly the first time. I actually made the tape a little bit too narrow, and so I wanted to show you guys still how I made it work. So you wanna continually taping this tape, and as you go, slowly run your thumb along the tape so you can get it nice and set into the main groove of the rim. And what I did actually for the second pass of this is I actually moved the tape over. So the first pass, I essentially butted it against the left of the rim, did 1 full rotation, then butted it against the right for the second full coverage rotation. After that, I took my valve from my tube and cut it up, making sure to cut it up nice and thin so that the tire can still sit in there with the valve and you're not having this huge amount of rubber flapping around it. Typically most tubes are kind of enforced around there, so it makes it really nice and easy. Then take your stock little lock washer that usually comes with all the tubes and put that on the outside to pull the valve into the hole and seat it nicely. And then you're gonna beat up the tire like you normally would. Now, for me, if I was setting this up with a tubeless valve, the benefit is the core of it is removable, so I can fully bead the tire and then put sealant through the valve core. Most tubes you probably have aren't gonna have removable valve cores, but here's your workaround. All you're simply gonna do is dump the desired amount of sealant into the tire. Now for this tire, it was asking for about 2 ounces, so that's what I put in there. Then I fully beaded the tire and then spun it around a little bit to fully basically splash some sealant all over the tire to make it that much faster when beading it. Now I always recommend, if you do have a compressor or a pump that allows you to have a compressor function of it to blow air into it, you want to use that. I didn't actually personally try this out with just a floor pump, but let me know in the comments below if it works for you. Now this is a tubeless compatible rim and a tubeless compatible tire, so this is gonna be the best possible outcome. Since my compressor does not have the fitting for Presta, I actually threaded on a Presta valve adapter, so it basically converted it to Schrader. Typically, if you set up with a tubeless valve, you're gonna have the valve core out of it, so you don't need to do this step. So I used it, didn't think that there was actually gonna be enough airflow to beat it, but as you can see in this video footage, it beaded up fine. It did spill a little bit more sealant than I usually see when beading with my compressor setup, but it wasn't anything crazy. It didn't shoot out a ton. It just slowly leaked around some of the edges. Now what I always recommend to do is take the tire, spin it around, bounce it on the ground a few times. Then I would recommend doing your other wheel and then immediately taking these wheels out, put them on your bike and go for a quick ride. This is gonna help disperse the sealant around and fill in any micro gaps between the rim and the tire so they don't slowly leak air overnight. That's typically what happens when you don't do this, and it happened to me before. But as you can see here, this is actually another wheel that I did that's budget tubeless, and it's held fine. This has been 3 or 4 days, and I still have a good amount of air pressure in this that I'm actually really surprised about. And this is still a standard tube valve. This is a great hack alone for the tube valve for a tubeless setup when you're out and you're looking for one, or they didn't show up in time and you want to do a ride. I think that's my favorite part of this. It's also the least amount of work. Now, for personal experiences, I'm going to go through at the very end here. I have set up now 3 wheels like this and ridden on 2 of them. I did this wheel for the purpose of the video, and then the 2 650B wheels that I have on my state bike all-road, which I'll be doing a review for soon, I did test this out and I went on a ride, even getting those things down to the low 20 PSI mark, worrying that I was gonna possibly burp them. And so I got them in the low 20s for a ride that I did, and I had no issues with it burping sealant or anything. It felt great. And then I obviously had them pumped up to about 40 or 45 for the road sections, so just make sure that they still held higher pressure as well. And they can go higher than that, but realistically on the street for that kind of bike, I don't run more than 45, maybe 50. So I've had great experience with this so far. I definitely would recommend it if you're crafty or just have a very highly precise person. Again, I wasn't even perfect at this, and it still worked for me. So keep in mind, if you want to have a little bit of my tips and tricks at the end of this, I would probably add an extra ½ ounce of sealant to your setup, because you're probably gonna have a little extra blow by from that when initially setting it up. If you do have tubes that do have removable cores, it will make it a little bit easier, but again, as you can see here, not super necessary. Now, if you don't have a compressor, this may or may not be possible to fully bead it on there. And again, I am using a tubeless compatible tire and rim, so it's more likely to work. If you try this hack on a non-tubeless rim, I can't tell you what's gonna happen at that point. So to wrap this up, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on something I haven't done in a while, which is a little bit of a DIY. Please comment below on your thoughts and what kind of things you've done or maybe want to see me try out. I've heard the best comment I think so far was trying to make those cush cores out of like pool noodles. That is something I have no idea about, but who knows, maybe you'll see it in a future video. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon below. I'm trying to make this YouTube thing a full-time, real gig, and I really do appreciate it. And you can find links to my Facebook and Instagram in there as well. And make sure to turn on notifications so you can see all my weekly cycling content that I put out on this channel. And thanks for watching another episode of Locked In.
Let's get locked in today. Like tutorials and quick and fix tips.